Why in the world are we studying Aristotle in psychology? You say Aristotle is a philosopher. Why would we want to study him in a psychology course? There's a couple of good reasons for doing that. One reason is that Aristotle exemplifies this sort of questioning, critical attitude towards the traditional views of his day. That questioning attitude, that critical attitude, is one of the basic important attitudes that scientists demonstrate also. The other second reason is this critical attitude is combined with a willingness and a desire to communicate with others and to have group discussions about various topics of the day that are important. So this combination of a critical viewpoint, a questioning viewpoint, along with interacting with others who have curiosity in a particular question. Those are two important attitudes that are the basis of modern scientific psychology and science in general today. The third thing that Aristotle is important for, especially for psychology, is that he helped to develop modern scientific methodology. The importance of combining observation of the world and then making inferences or thinking about the world. The way we learn about the world, according to Aristotle, is to experience it, to sense it, to see what's actually happening. And then we acquire all of these sensory experiences, and then we infer or we come to some conclusion about those experiences. The fourth and final reason why Aristotle is important for psychology is that he viewed some psychological phenomena in biological terms. So in a sense, he was one of the earliest biological psychologists. Let's look at the scientific method, this idea of observation and the acquisition of knowledge. Let's look at that a little bit more closely. Most philosophers were interested in identifying first principles or truths or essences about the nature of things. And Aristotle was also interested in that endeavor. And in a sense, what science does is something very similar, trying to identify the laws of nature or the principles by which things in the natural world operate. Well, the Greek philosophers had that same interest also, to identify first principles or truths or essences, whatever it might be. And in a sense, that's what we do in psychology too. We're interested in laws of human behavior and laws of mental processes. What are the principles by which we acquire behaviors, for example? What are the laws or what are the principles of memory and how memory works? So in a sense, as psychologists, we're attempting to do the same thing that Aristotle was doing. Aristotle believed that the best way to acquire knowledge is through making observations and thinking about those observations and coming to some conclusion about those observations. This combines what's called empiricism and rationalism. Empiricism is the viewpoint that knowledge is best acquired through sensory experience. Rationalism is the viewpoint that proposes that we can acquire knowledge about the world through thinking about the world. Now, what Aristotle does is he combines both of these two approaches. And this is somewhat different than what Plato attempted to do. Plato felt that we can learn best about the world by thinking about the world. And he felt that the body and the sensory experiences would only lead us astray in acquiring first principles or essences or knowledge about the world. Aristotle was not that interested in mathematics, which is sort of odd, and sort of puts him at odds with a lot of modern scientific methodologies. So he was interested in observation, definition, and classification. And a lot of early scientific effort was put into that inductive kind of approach. Okay, let's talk briefly about Aristotle's theory of memory. There's a couple of important points to think about here, and one is that memory is based on past sensory experience. It's a very modern idea in a lot of ways, and he said that memories are composed of past sensory experience. Now, this differed from what Plato thought about memory. Plato thought that the knowledge, the things that we retrieve through memory, we are born with. And all that we have to do is to think hard enough, and we'll be able to retrieve that knowledge. So, in a sense, we're born with memories. We're born with knowledge. All we have to do is retrieve those things. Aristotle thought otherwise. The contents of memory come from sensory experience, and retrieval or recall is just simply searching for and finding those memories of past experience. Another very important contribution that Aristotle made in connection with memory was through his 4 laws of association. He essentially said that memory works through different kinds of associations. We still hold that view of memory today. The idea that memory works through association is still very relevant today. Aristotle proposed that there were 4 laws of association. The first was the law of contiguity. And the idea here is that when we remember one thing, we also remember something else that may have co-occurred with that experience. So, for example, when we think of our friends, we think about the good times that we've had. And so there's a co-occurrence of having a good time and being with friends. The second law is the law of similarity. So, for example, if we think of the term self-esteem, we also may think of the term self-efficacy. Both of those concepts are similar in that they're both beliefs about the self. In terms of self-esteem, those are beliefs about the value or the worth that we might have. And when we think of self-efficacy, those are beliefs about our ability to achieve different kinds of things. And so when we think of one term, that may activate thoughts of the other term because they're similar to one another. A third law of association is the law of contrast. This is sort of the opposite of the law of similarity. So when we think of one thing, say optimism, oftentimes that can activate the thought of pessimism. Pessimism and optimism are opposites. Finally, there's the law of frequency. And the idea here is that the more often 2 things, 2 experiences, 2 events co-occur, the more often that happens, the stronger the association or connection between those 2 things. These laws of association later become the basis in the 1600s for what is known as Associationism. Associationism is exemplified by, say, John Locke, the English empiricist philosopher. And he takes this idea of association, and he proposes that we generate complex ideas from simple ideas, that we make that connection between the 2, and that's how we develop complex ideas. Or he takes these laws of association and also, as Aristotle does, think about how memory might work. Now, associationism then becomes the more modern basis for what we know of as behaviorism in modern psychology. With the rise of behaviorism in the 1900s, we see John Watson proposing this idea of classical conditioning, where what's associated here are two events or two experiences or two stimuli. And then B.F. Skinner comes along and talks about operant conditioning and how we make associations or connections between some behavior and the consequences of that behavior. So, in conclusion, there's three reasons why Aristotle is important for psychology. First of all, he exemplifies that modern scientific attitude of curiosity, of questioning, of critical analysis. Second of all, Aristotle is important because he's provided in part the basis for the modern scientific method. This idea of combining observation and making inferences about those observations. And then finally, Aristotle is important for psychology because he proposes that there are some psychological processes, such as memory, that have a biological basis. That is, the processes of sensation. There you go. Aristotle the Psychologist.